Welcome to One Book, One Coffee. It's so wonderful to have you here, choosing to immerse yourself in the timeless and transformative world of Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. The fact that you're joining us today says something remarkable about you. In a world where so many are content with scrolling through social media or catching the latest binge-worthy series, you've chosen instead to invest in learning and growing through literature, and that's truly commendable. Leaves of Grass is not just a collection of poems. It's an intimate conversation with the soul, an exploration of the human spirit in its most raw and authentic form. Whitman's work has inspired many, from thinkers like Robert Ingersoll, who called him the poet of humanity, to cultural figures who found in his words a guiding light. Walt Whitman, a self-taught man of humble beginnings, was driven by the world around him and the experiences that shaped his life, from the bustling streets of New York to the harrowing sights of the Civil War. He wrote with a fervor and an honest love for humanity that was unprecedented. Now, a quick note before we dive in. This is a detailed, chapter-by-chapter walkthrough, so it's going to be a longer session. Take your time with it. There's no rush. If you need to step away, save this video to your watch later or forward the link to yourself on WhatsApp so you can pick up right where you left off. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's walk through this book together, chapter by chapter, idea by idea. Let's begin. A personal conversation with the soul. Walt Whitman, a self-taught poet born in 1819, was driven by the vibrancy of the world around him and his own experiences during the Civil War. His love for humanity was reflected in his groundbreaking work, Leaves of Grass. Picture yourself sitting in your favorite coffee shop, steam rising from your mug, and someone starts telling you about the most revolutionary poem ever written about what it means to be human. That's exactly what we're diving into today with Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, the beating heart of his masterpiece, Leaves of Grass. This isn't just poetry, my friend. This is a manifesto about the beautiful contradiction of being simultaneously unique and utterly connected to every other soul on this planet. Whitman opens his song with one of the most audacious declarations in all of literature: "I celebrate myself and sing myself." Now, before you think this sounds narcissistic, hold on. He immediately follows with, "And what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you." Think about that for a moment. He's saying that celebrating himself is actually celebrating all of us, because at our most fundamental level, we're made of the same stuff, literally the same atoms, the same stardust, the same divine spark. This idea feels incredibly modern, doesn't it? Today we know from science that the carbon in our bodies was forged in the hearts of dying stars, that we share DNA with every living thing, that the breath we just took contains molecules that were once breathed by Shakespeare, by your grandmother, by strangers on the other side of the world. Whitman intuited this cosmic connection long before we had the science to prove it. But here's where Whitman gets really radical. In a society obsessed with hierarchy, with who's better than whom, he insists that every person contains infinite worth. He writes about watching a blade of grass and seeing it as no less miraculous than the stars. He observes a runaway slave and declares that person's humanity as sacred as any president's. Can you imagine how revolutionary this was in 1855? And honestly, how revolutionary it still is today, when we're constantly ranking ourselves against others on social media, when we're told our worth depends on our productivity or our achievements. Whitman paints these incredible scenes throughout the poem. He's simultaneously a farmer, a sailor, a mother giving birth, a wounded soldier. He doesn't just observe life, he becomes it. There's this beautiful passage where he describes containing multitudes, being large enough to contradict himself. Now, think about this. How often do we beat ourselves up for being inconsistent, for changing our minds, for being complex? Whitman says that's not a bug, it's a feature. We're vast enough to hold contradictions because life itself is contradictory. One of my favorite moments in the poem is when Whitman talks about loafing and inviting his soul. In our hustle culture, where being busy is worn like a badge of honor, Whitman advocates for what we might call mindful presence. He literally lies on the grass, doing nothing productive, and calls it essential spiritual practice. He's saying that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply exist, simply be present to the miracle of being alive. When's the last time you did that? When did you last lie on grass and just be? The poem is also deeply democratic in the most beautiful sense. Whitman doesn't just write about presidents and heroes. He celebrates the woman cleaning fish at the market, the blacksmith with muscled arms, the child playing in the street. He sees the divine in the ordinary, the sacred in the everyday. This is someone who understood that every person walking down the street has an entire universe inside them, their dreams, their heartbreaks, their secret hopes, their untold stories. What strikes me most powerfully about Song of Myself is how it bridges the gap between individual celebration and universal connection. In our current moment, when we're often told we have to choose between self-love and caring for others, between personal success and collective good, Whitman offers a third way. He suggests that truly knowing yourself, truly celebrating your own divine spark, naturally leads to recognizing that same spark in everyone else. This isn't just beautiful poetry, it's a practical philosophy for living. When you really understand that you're both utterly unique and completely connected to everything else, it changes how you move through the world. You can pursue your dreams without diminishing others. You can love yourself without narcissism. You can be confident without arrogance. As we move forward in our exploration of Leaves of Grass, keep this central insight close. Whitman believed that the most radical act is to fully embrace both your individuality and your interconnectedness. In a world that often feels fragmented, this ancient wisdom wrapped in revolutionary verse offers us a path toward wholeness. So take another sip of that coffee, and let's continue this journey into one of the most profound celebrations of human existence ever written. Picture yourself sitting in a bustling coffee shop on a Monday morning, watching the barista craft your latte with careful precision, the way they steam the milk to just the right temperature, the deliberate pour that creates that perfect heart in the foam. Now imagine Walt Whitman walking into that same coffee shop, and instead of just ordering his drink, he stops to marvel at every single person working there. The barista, yes, but also the person restocking the pastry case, the manager counting the register, even the delivery driver unloading boxes of coffee beans. This is exactly the lens through which Whitman viewed the world in A Song for Occupations, and it's a perspective that might just revolutionize how you see your own daily work. When Whitman penned these verses in the mid-1800s, America was transforming from an agricultural society into an industrial powerhouse. People were leaving farms for factories, and there was this growing sense that somehow manual labor was becoming less dignified, less meaningful. Sound familiar? Today we have our own version of this anxiety, don't we? We worry about automation replacing human workers, about whether our jobs really matter in the grand scheme of things, about finding purpose in our daily grind. But here's where Whitman's vision becomes absolutely radical. He doesn't just say that all work has dignity, he practically shouts it from the rooftops. He sees the carpenter's hammer as a musical instrument, the seamstress's needle as a painter's brush, the farmer's plow as a poet's pen. Think about this for a moment. When was the last time you considered your work tools as instruments of creation? Whether you're typing on a keyboard, wielding a stethoscope, or operating a cash register, Whitman would see you as an artist of everyday life. The poem reads like a census of American workers, but it's written with the reverence usually reserved for saints or heroes. Whitman catalogs everyone from pilots navigating ships to mothers nursing babies, from blacksmiths to bookkeepers, and he treats each occupation as if it's the most important job in the world. Because to him, it is. He understood something we often forget in our LinkedIn-obsessed, status-driven culture, that the person who keeps the subway running is just as essential as the CEO who rides it to work. Now think about this. How often do we actually see the people who make our daily lives possible? The night shift workers who clean office buildings, the early morning bakers who ensure fresh bread is waiting when stores open, the countless invisible hands that keep our complex society functioning. Whitman saw them all, and more importantly, he saw them as equals. Not just economically, though he certainly believed in fair wages, but spiritually and morally equal. In his view, there's no hierarchy of human worth based on what you do for a living. This isn't naive idealism either. Whitman worked plenty of manual jobs himself. He was a printer, a carpenter, a journalist who often struggled financially. He knew the ache of tired muscles and the frustration of difficult customers. But he also experienced something profound: the satisfaction that comes from work well done, the quiet pride of contributing something useful to the world. He writes about work the way others write about falling in love, with wonder and gratitude and deep appreciation. Consider how this applies to your own life. Maybe you're in a job that doesn't feel particularly glamorous or meaningful. Maybe you're answering customer service calls or data entry or any of 1,000 tasks that feel routine or repetitive. Whitman would invite you to see your work differently. That customer service call, you're potentially the bright spot in someone's difficult day. That data entry, you're creating order from chaos, building the information infrastructure that helps organizations serve people better. The beauty of Whitman's vision is that it doesn't require you to change jobs to find meaning. It requires you to change perspective. He's not saying every job is perfect or that working conditions can't be improved. He's saying that the act of human labor itself, the fact that we use our hands and minds to create, to serve, to build, to maintain, is inherently sacred. This connects to something we desperately need to hear in our current moment. We live in an age where we're constantly told that we need to find our passion, follow our dreams, turn our hobbies into side hustles. But what if meaning isn't something you have to chase? What if it's already present in the work you're doing right now, waiting to be recognized and honored? As we transition from Whitman's celebration of labor into the broader themes of Leaves of Grass, remember this: every time you see someone at work, whether it's the person delivering your mail or performing surgery, you're witnessing what Whitman called the eternal miracle of human creativity in action. And you, whatever your occupation, are part of that same magnificent chorus of human endeavor. You know, there's something almost unsettling about sitting with Walt Whitman's To Think of Time. Picture this: you're holding your morning coffee, steam rising from the cup, and suddenly you're confronted with one of life's most persistent questions. What does it mean that we're all just passing through? Whitman doesn't ease us into this meditation gently. Instead, he grabs us by the shoulders and says, "Look, really look at what time is doing to all of us." The poem opens with Whitman observing a funeral procession, and isn't that just like him? While most of us would politely look away, he stares directly into the face of mortality. He watches the hearse roll by, sees the mourners in their black clothes, and instead of feeling morbid, he feels curious. Deeply, almost hungrily curious. What happens to that person who was just here yesterday, laughing or complaining or eating breakfast? Where do they go when the body stops working? Now think about this for a moment. When was the last time you really sat with the reality that everyone you see on the street, everyone in your office, everyone you love is temporary? We live most of our days as if we're permanent fixtures, don't we? As if time is this endless resource we can spend carelessly. But Whitman won't let us have that comfortable delusion. He's like that friend who asks the uncomfortable questions at dinner parties, except he's asking them about existence itself. What's remarkable about Whitman's approach here is that he doesn't get depressed by these thoughts. Instead, he gets energized. He starts cataloging all the people who came before us, all the ordinary folks who lived and died and are now part of some great cosmic recycling program. The farmers who work the same soil we walk on, the mothers who worried about their children just like mothers do today, the workers who built the roads we still travel. Time, for Whitman, isn't a thief stealing our lives away. It's more like a great river that we're all swimming in together. Consider how radically different this is from our modern relationship with time. We treat time like it's scarce, like we're always running out of it. We schedule our days down to the minute. We measure productivity. We talk about time management as if time were some rebellious employee we need to control. But Whitman sees time as abundant, even eternal. Not because we individually live forever, but because we're part of something that does. Here's where it gets really interesting. Whitman starts talking about the people of the future, the ones who will come after us. He imagines them looking back at our era the way we look back at ancient civilizations. Think about that for a second. Someone in the year 2150 might discover your social media posts the way we discover cave paintings. They'll wonder what you were thinking, what you worried about, what made you laugh. You are, right now, as you listen to this, someone's ancestor. You're part of the great human story that stretches backward and forward through time. But Whitman doesn't stop at this cosmic perspective. He brings it down to earth with startling intimacy. He talks about the simple fact that your body, this body you're inhabiting right now, is made of elements that have been recycling through the universe for billions of years. The calcium in your bones was once in the shells of ancient sea creatures. The iron in your blood was forged in the heart of a dying star. You're not separate from time and the cosmos. You are time and cosmos, temporarily organized into the shape of yourself. This is where Whitman's meditation becomes almost psychedelic in its implications. If you're made of star stuff, if your atoms have been part of rocks and trees and other people, then what exactly dies when you die? Your particular configuration, yes, but not your essential substance. You return to the great pool of being that everything emerges from and returns to. It's like you're a wave on the ocean, and when the wave subsides, the water doesn't disappear. It just becomes ocean again. Now, you might be thinking this sounds like pretty abstract comfort, and maybe it is. But Whitman insists there's something profoundly practical about understanding our place in time this way. When you really grasp that you're part of this vast, ongoing experiment of consciousness and matter, it changes how you live. You stop hoarding experiences and start sharing them. You stop fearing death and start celebrating life. You realize that the love you give, the kindness you show, the beauty you create, these things ripple forward through time in ways you'll never fully understand. As we prepare to move deeper into Whitman's sprawling celebration of existence, carry this thought with you. You are both utterly temporary and completely eternal, a brief flame that burns with the same fire that lights the stars. So we've been wandering through Whitman's celebration of life and democracy, and now we're about to dive into something completely different. Picture this. You're settling into your favorite chair with that perfect cup of coffee, and suddenly Whitman takes us on the most extraordinary journey into the realm of sleep and dreams. The Sleepers is like nothing else in Leaves of Grass. It's Whitman's deep dive into the mysterious world that claims us every single night. Think about this for a moment. What happens when you close your eyes and drift off? Where does your conscious self go? Whitman had this incredible insight that sleep isn't just rest. It's this universal equalizer, this shared human experience that connects every person who has ever lived. He writes about wandering through the night, observing sleepers everywhere, and what he discovers is absolutely fascinating. The poem begins with Whitman as this ghostly observer, floating through bedrooms and sleeping quarters, watching people in their most vulnerable state. But here's where it gets really interesting. He realizes that in sleep, all the barriers we construct during our waking hours simply dissolve. The rich and the poor, the powerful and the powerless, the young and the old, they all look remarkably similar when they're sleeping. Their faces soften, their worries fade, and they become purely human. Now think about your own experience with sleep. Haven't you noticed how different people look when they're sleeping? That colleague who intimidates you at work, that family member you argue with in sleep, they return to something almost childlike, innocent. Whitman saw this and understood something profound about human nature. Beneath all our roles and masks and social positions, we're fundamentally the same. We all need rest, we all dream, we all surrender to this mysterious process every night. But Whitman takes this observation much further. He begins to imagine that he can actually enter the dreams of these sleepers, that consciousness itself might be more fluid than we think. It's like he's describing what we might call today the collective unconscious, this idea that maybe we're all connected at some deeper level. When you've had those moments where you're thinking about someone and they suddenly call you, or when you have a dream that feels like it belongs to someone else entirely, you're touching on what Whitman was exploring over a century ago. The really beautiful part of this poem is how Whitman moves between different sleepers and different dreams. He visits the dreams of a young woman, an old man, sailors on ships, mothers with their children. Each dream world is vivid and specific, yet they're all connected by this thread of shared humanity. It's like he's saying that while we experience our dreams individually, there's something universal about the dreaming process itself. Here's where this gets practical for us today. In our hyperconnected world, we often feel more isolated than ever. We're constantly comparing ourselves to others on social media, feeling like everyone else has it figured out while we're struggling. But Whitman's vision in The Sleepers offers this incredible antidote to that loneliness. Every night when the world goes to sleep, we're all participating in this same mysterious process. The CEO and the janitor, the celebrity and the unknown artist. We all close our eyes and enter this realm where our usual identities don't matter. Think about how different our world might be if we remembered this truth more often. What if, instead of seeing others as fundamentally different from us, we remembered that they too have dreams, fears, hopes that visit them in sleep? What if we approached difficult conversations remembering that this person, like us, spends a third of their life in this vulnerable, unconscious state? Whitman also explores the idea that sleep and dreams might be where we process not just our individual experiences, but somehow the experiences of humanity itself. It's a wild concept, but think about those dreams you've had that seem to take place in different time periods, or where you knew things you couldn't possibly know. Modern neuroscience tells us that dreams help us process memories and emotions, but Whitman was suggesting something even more expansive, that maybe we're also processing collective memories, ancestral experiences, the dreams of all who came before us. As we move forward in our journey through Leaves of Grass, carry this image with you. Every person you encounter today will tonight become a sleeper, will enter that same mysterious realm you visit every night. In that space, all our differences fade away, and we return to our essential humanity. It's a profound reminder that beneath all the noise and conflict of waking life, we share something deeper. This nightly journey into the unknown, this universal surrender to dreams and rest. Picture yourself settling into your favorite chair with that perfect cup of coffee, steam rising like morning mist, as we dive into one of Walt Whitman's most revolutionary and intimate poems. I Sing the Body Electric isn't just a catchy title that inspired countless songs and movies. It's Whitman's bold declaration that our physical bodies aren't separate from our souls, but are the very temples where our spirits reside. Now think about this for a moment. How often do we treat our bodies like inconvenient vessels we're stuck with, rather than marvels deserving celebration? Whitman was writing in the 1850s, when Victorian society wrapped the human form in layers of shame and propriety. Yet here he was, proclaiming that every muscle, every curve, every breath was sacred. It was scandalous then, and honestly, it's still pretty radical now. The poem opens with Whitman's characteristic boldness. He's going to sing the body electric, meaning he's going to celebrate the energy, the life force, the sheer miraculous nature of being human in physical form. But here's what's fascinating. He doesn't separate the body from the soul like philosophers had been doing for centuries. Instead, he argues that the body is the soul. Think of it like this. You know how people say your phone is just plastic and metal, but really, it's your connection to the world, your memories, your relationships. Whitman saw our bodies the same way, not just flesh and bone, but the very essence of who we are. He takes us through different scenes, different bodies, and each one tells a story. There's the farmer at auction, yes, Whitman actually describes a slave auction, forcing readers to confront the horror of treating human bodies as property. When he catalogues every part of this man's body, from his strong arms to his gentle eyes, he's not being voyeuristic. He's making us see the humanity, the irreplaceable individuality of someone society was treating as an object. It's like when we scroll past homeless people on the street without really seeing them. Whitman is grabbing us by the shoulders and saying, "Look, really look. This is someone's father, someone's son, someone whose body carries stories you can't imagine." Then he shifts to celebrating women's bodies with the same reverence, which was absolutely revolutionary. In an era when women were often seen as either pure, untouchable angels or dangerous temptresses, Whitman presents the female form as powerful, beautiful, and worthy of the same detailed appreciation he gives men. He's essentially saying what body-positive movements are fighting for today, that all bodies, regardless of gender, size, or shape, carry inherent dignity and beauty. But here's where Whitman gets really interesting. He doesn't just celebrate perfect, idealized bodies. He sings of old bodies, young bodies, working bodies marked by labor, bodies that society might overlook or dismiss. Think about how we're constantly bombarded with images of perfect bodies on social media, how we're taught to hide our scars, our stretch marks, our imperfections. Whitman would probably look at our filtered selfies and ask, but where's the real you? Where's the body that's lived, that's worked, that's loved? The poem becomes almost like a medical textbook at times, as Whitman lists body parts with scientific precision, but he's not being clinical, he's being reverent. It's like he's saying a prayer over each bone, each organ, each system that keeps us alive. When was the last time you marveled at the fact that your heart beats without you thinking about it, that your lungs expand and contract in perfect rhythm, that your brain processes these words while simultaneously keeping your entire body functioning? Whitman saw this everyday miracle and refused to take it for granted. Near the end, he makes his most radical claim, that the body is not just connected to the soul, but that understanding and celebrating our physical selves is the path to spiritual enlightenment. In our age of meditation apps and wellness trends, we're constantly told to transcend the physical, to rise above bodily concerns. Whitman suggests the opposite, that diving deeper into appreciation of our physical existence is how we touch the divine. As we finish our coffee and close this section, consider how different our world might be if we truly embraced Whitman's vision. What if we saw every body, including our own, as electric, as miraculous, as worthy of song? What if we treated our physical selves not as problems to be solved or perfected, but as poems already written in flesh and blood? This is the gift Whitman offers us. Permission to love ourselves completely, bodies and souls intertwined, electric and eternal. Picture this. You're sitting on a crowded subway car during rush hour, surrounded by strangers scrolling through their phones, each lost in their own world. You glance up and catch someone's eye for just a moment before they look away. There's something profound happening in that instant, something Walt Whitman understood deeply when he stood on a ferry crossing the East River between Manhattan and Brooklyn over a century and a half ago. In Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, Whitman captures one of the most beautiful and haunting truths about human existence, that we're all part of an endless stream of humanity, connected across time in ways we rarely stop to consider. Now, think about this for a moment. When Whitman boarded that ferry in the 1850s, Brooklyn was still a separate city, and the iconic Brooklyn Bridge wouldn't be built for another 20 years. The ferry was the lifeline connecting these two worlds, carrying thousands of commuters back and forth across the choppy waters of the East River. But Whitman saw something extraordinary in this mundane daily ritual. He realized that this simple act of crossing water was a metaphor for something much larger. The way human experiences ripple across generations, connecting us to people we'll never meet but whose lives mirror our own in countless ways. What makes this poem so remarkable is how Whitman speaks directly to us, his future readers, as if we're standing right there beside him on that ferry deck. He addresses us as you throughout the poem, creating this incredible sense of intimacy across time. He's essentially saying, I know you're reading this 50, 100, maybe 200 years from now, and I want you to know that what I'm feeling right now, what I'm seeing right now, you'll feel and see too. It's like receiving a message in a bottle from the past, but instead of being washed up on some distant shore, it lands directly in your hands. Think about your own daily commute for a moment. Whether you're driving the same highway every morning, taking the same train, or walking the same route to work, you're participating in a ritual that connects you to countless others who have made similar journeys. Whitman understood that these routine movements aren't just about getting from point A to point B. They're about being part of something larger than ourselves, part of the great human flow that continues long after we're gone. In the poem, Whitman describes watching the seagulls wheeling overhead, the way the sunlight catches the water, the faces of his fellow passengers lost in thought. But here's what's brilliant about his observation. He realizes that future generations will see the same gulls, the same play of light on water, the same contemplative expressions on commuters' faces. The specific details change, sure, but the essential human experience remains constant. Today, instead of seagulls, you might notice pigeons on the subway platform. Instead of gaslight reflecting off the water, you see the glow of smartphone screens illuminating faces in the darkness of a tunnel. What Whitman is really exploring here is the paradox of human individuality within collective experience. Each of us feels utterly unique, convinced that our thoughts, our struggles, our moments of wonder are ours alone. Yet here's this poet from the 1850s describing feelings so universal that they resonate perfectly with someone checking their phone on a bus in 2024. He writes about the dark patches that fall upon him, those moments of doubt and confusion that every human experiences. He acknowledges his own contradictions, his capacity for both good and troubling thoughts. This isn't a sanitized, idealized version of humanity he's presenting. It's raw, honest, and completely relatable. The ferry itself becomes a powerful symbol for transition and transformation. Water has always represented change in human consciousness, and crossing water suggests moving from one state of being to another. But Whitman adds another layer. The ferry represents how we're all passengers on this journey of existence, temporary travelers who will eventually disembark while others take our place. Yet the ferry keeps running, the crossing continues, and the essential human story goes on. This is why Crossing Brooklyn Ferry feels so relevant today, even in our hyperconnected yet often isolating digital age. Whitman reminds us that beneath all our technological advances and cultural changes, we're still fundamentally the same creatures who wonder about our place in the universe, who feel lonely in crowds, who search for meaning in everyday experiences. The next time you're commuting somewhere, caught in that liminal space between destinations, remember that you're part of this ongoing human story that Whitman so beautifully captured. You're crossing your own ferry, connected to everyone who has made this journey before, and everyone who will make it after you're gone. Picture yourself sitting by the ocean at twilight, watching the waves roll in and out with that hypnotic rhythm that seems to whisper secrets about time itself. This is where Whitman takes us in Out of the Cradle, Endlessly Rocking, one of his most haunting and beautiful poems that reads like a meditation on how we become who we are through loss, memory, and the endless cycle of life and death. The poem begins with Whitman as an older man, remembering a moment from his childhood when he witnessed something that changed him forever. He's walking along the beach on Long Island, and he comes across two mockingbirds who have built their nest together. Day after day, the young Walt watches these birds, fascinated by their devotion to each other and their joyful songs that seem to celebrate pure love. But then, tragedy strikes. The female bird disappears, leaving her mate alone, calling out desperately into the night for his lost love. Now, think about this for a moment. Haven't we all had those childhood experiences that felt like they cracked something open inside us? Maybe it was watching a grandparent grow frail, or seeing a beloved pet pass away, or witnessing our parents argue for the first time. Whitman understood that these moments of loss are often when we first truly wake up to the deeper currents of existence. Night after night, the young Whitman returns to listen to this bereft bird pouring his heart out in song. The mockingbird's aria becomes a kind of teacher, showing the boy that love and loss are inseparable, that the capacity to feel deep joy inevitably opens us to profound sorrow. It's like learning that the price of admission to truly being alive is accepting that everything we love will eventually be taken from us. But here's where Whitman's genius really shines through. He doesn't present this as a depressing revelation, but as a kind of initiation into wisdom. The mockingbird's song of loss becomes the catalyst for the boy's awakening as a poet. It's as if the bird is saying, "This is what it means to be fully human. This ache, this longing, this beautiful sadness, this is the raw material of art and understanding." The ocean itself becomes a character in this memory, its constant rhythm providing the soundtrack to this education in mortality. Whitman calls it the old crone rocking the cradle, suggesting that the sea has been witness to countless cycles of birth, love, loss, and death. The waves seem to whisper the word death over and over, but not as a threat or an ending. Rather, death becomes the word that gives meaning to life, the shadow that makes the light precious. Think about how relevant this feels today, when we're constantly trying to avoid discomfort, to curate perfect lives on social media, to somehow bypass the messy, painful parts of being human. Whitman is reminding us that those difficult experiences aren't obstacles to happiness. They're actually doorways to deeper understanding and compassion. When we try to shield ourselves from all loss and difficulty, we also cut ourselves off from the fullness of what it means to be alive. The poem suggests that true poetry, true art, true wisdom emerges not from happiness alone, but from our willingness to sit with the full spectrum of human experience. Just as the mockingbird's most beautiful song came from his deepest grief, our own capacity for creativity and empathy often springs from our wounds. It's like how a broken bone, when it heals, is often stronger at the break than it was before. Whitman also weaves in this beautiful idea about memory and how certain moments echo through our entire lives. That night on the beach becomes a touchstone for him, something he returns to again and again to understand who he is and why he writes. We all have these formative moments, don't we? Times when we felt the world shift beneath our feet and suddenly saw things we'd never noticed before. As we move forward in our exploration of Leaves of Grass, we'll see how this theme of embracing the full cycle of existence, this willingness to find beauty in loss and meaning in impermanence, becomes central to Whitman's entire philosophy. He's not asking us to be happy about death or to welcome suffering, but rather to recognize that our attempts to fully love and connect with life inevitably bring us face to face with mortality. And somehow, mysteriously, this recognition doesn't diminish our joy but deepens it, like how knowing that summer will end makes us treasure those perfect warm evenings even more. The cradle keeps rocking, the waves keep rolling, and in that endless rhythm, Whitman found not despair, but a profound and sustaining music. You know, sometimes a single poem can capture the soul of an entire nation in mourning, and that's exactly what happened when Walt Whitman sat down to write, when lilacs last in the dooryard bloomed. Picture this. It's 1865, the Civil War has just ended, and then, boom, Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. The whole country is reeling, trying to process this unimaginable loss. And here's Whitman, this rough-around-the-edges poet from Brooklyn, who somehow finds the perfect words to express what millions of Americans couldn't even begin to articulate. Now think about this for a moment. When someone you deeply admire dies unexpectedly, how do you even begin to grieve? Whitman faced this challenge on a national scale. He had to find a way to mourn not just a president, but the death of hope itself for so many people. And what does he do? He turns to nature, specifically to lilacs blooming in his dooryard, a thrush singing in a swamp, and a star that seems to droop in the western sky. The genius of this poem lies in how Whitman weaves together these three symbols like threads in a tapestry. The lilacs represent the eternal cycle of life and death, blooming every spring regardless of human tragedy. Every April, when those purple clusters appear, they're going to remind him, and us, of this moment of national grief. It's like how certain songs can instantly transport you back to a specific time and place, except Whitman is creating that trigger deliberately, turning his own backyard into a memorial. Then there's this hermit thrush, hidden away in the swamp, singing what Whitman calls the Song of Death. Now, you might wonder why a bird song becomes so central to a poem about Lincoln's assassination. But here's the thing, Whitman understood something profound about grief. Sometimes the most healing thing isn't human comfort, but the wild, untamed voice of nature itself, singing truths we can't quite put into words. Think about those moments when you've been walking alone, maybe after a difficult day, and you hear a bird singing, and somehow it cuts right through your emotional fog. That's exactly what Whitman is capturing here. The drooping star in the western sky represents Lincoln himself, this guiding light that seemed so permanent, so reliable, suddenly falling from view. Whitman watched this star night after night during Lincoln's final weeks, not knowing he was essentially watching a countdown to tragedy. It's heartbreaking when you think about it, how the natural world seemed to be mourning alongside humanity. But here's where Whitman's genius really shines through. Instead of writing a traditional eulogy full of political praise and formal language, he creates this deeply personal, almost mystical experience of grief. He takes us on a journey through his own emotional landscape, from the initial shock and denial to a gradual acceptance that transforms into something larger than personal loss. He's essentially showing us how to grieve properly, not by hiding from the pain, but by walking straight through it with our eyes wide open. The poem becomes this incredible meditation on how death and life are intertwined. Whitman doesn't try to comfort us with platitudes about Lincoln being in a better place. Instead, he shows us how the president's death becomes part of the eternal cycle that includes those blooming lilacs, that singing thrush, and yes, even our own eventual mortality. It's uncomfortable, but it's also deeply honest in a way that most funeral speeches never dare to be. What makes this poem so relevant today is how Whitman captures the experience of collective grief, something we've all lived through recently with various tragedies, from mass shootings to the pandemic to the deaths of beloved public figures. Think about how entire communities can feel personally devastated when someone they've never met passes away. Whitman understood this phenomenon more than a century before social media made it even more intense. The poem also speaks to our relationship with nature during times of crisis. In our digital age, we often forget that the natural world continues its ancient rhythms regardless of human drama. Those lilacs are still going to bloom, that thrush is still going to sing, and somehow there's both comfort and perspective in that continuity. Whitman is essentially saying, yes, grieve fully, but also remember that you're part of something much larger than your immediate pain. As we move forward in our exploration of Whitman's revolutionary poetry, keep this poem in mind as perhaps his most emotionally mature work. It shows us a poet who has learned to channel his enormous capacity for feeling into something that serves not just his own healing, but the healing of an entire nation. Sometimes the most personal art becomes the most universal, and When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed is a perfect example of how one person's authentic response to loss can speak for millions. Picture this. You're settling in with your favorite mug, steam curling up from that perfect cup of coffee, and we're about to dive into one of the most profoundly human pieces of writing ever penned. Walt Whitman's The Wound Dresser isn't just a poem about the Civil War. It's a window into the soul of someone who chose to walk directly into humanity's darkest moments, armed with nothing but compassion and clean bandages. Now think about this for a moment. When most people hear about war, they imagine the grand strategies, the famous battles, the heroic charges. But Whitman, He takes us somewhere completely different. He takes us to the hospital tents, to the makeshift infirmaries, to the quiet spaces where young men lay dying far from home, calling out for their mothers. This isn't the war you see in movies. This is the war that happens in whispers, in gentle hands cleaning wounds, in the simple act of holding water to parched lips. Whitman worked as a volunteer nurse during the Civil War, and the wound dresser emerges from those experiences like a photograph developed in the darkroom of memory. But here's what's remarkable about this poem. It's written as if an old man is telling his story to curious children years later. "Come tell us, old man, as from young men and maidens that love me," the poem begins, and immediately we're drawn into this intimate circle, this fireside confession of what it means to tend to broken bodies and wounded souls. What strikes me most powerfully about this piece is how Whitman transforms the act of nursing into something almost sacred. He doesn't just describe changing bandages or administering medicine. He elevates these simple acts into a kind of communion. When he writes about moving from bed to bed, from wound to wound, there's something deeply ritualistic about it, like a priest moving through his congregation, offering not salvation but something equally precious: presence, dignity, recognition. Think about our world today, and you'll see the wound dressers everywhere. They're the ICU nurses who held iPads so COVID patients could say goodbye to their families. They're the social workers who sit with homeless individuals on park benches, not trying to fix everything, just being human together. They're the teachers who notice when a student comes to school hungry and quietly make sure there's an extra sandwich. Whitman understood something we're still learning. Sometimes the most radical act is simply showing up for someone else's pain. The genius of this poem lies in its unflinching honesty about what it means to witness suffering. Whitman doesn't romanticize war or death. He describes the crushed head, the perforated shoulder, the foot with the bullet wound. But here's the thing. He doesn't describe these injuries to shock us or to make us turn away. Instead, he shows us how tenderness can coexist with horror, how love can flourish in the most unlikely soil. There's this incredible moment in the poem where Whitman writes about how he would sit by the bedside of dying soldiers, sometimes for hours, just being present. No grand speeches, no attempts to make sense of senseless violence, just one human being acknowledging the worth and dignity of another. In our hyperconnected, always moving world, this kind of presence feels almost revolutionary, doesn't it? When was the last time you sat with someone, really sat with them, without trying to fix or solve or rush toward the next thing? What Whitman captures so beautifully is that caring for others changes the caregiver just as much as it helps the one being cared for. The wound dresser doesn't emerge from these experiences unchanged. He carries these faces, these stories, these moments of grace and grief with him for the rest of his life. And in a way, that's the point. We're all wound dressers in some capacity, whether we recognize it or not. We all have opportunities to choose compassion over convenience, presence over productivity. The poem also speaks to something we understand all too well in our current moment: the weight of collective trauma. Whitman was writing in the aftermath of a war that tore the country apart, and his wound dresser carries not just individual memories but the memory of a nation's pain. Sound familiar? We're living through our own collective traumas: pandemic, political division, climate anxiety, and Whitman's vision of radical compassion feels more relevant than ever. As we close this chapter of our coffee conversation, I want you to carry this image with you. Whitman's wound dresser, moving quietly through the hospital, offering water, adjusting pillows, writing letters home for those who couldn't hold a pen. It's not glamorous work. It doesn't make headlines. But it's the kind of work that holds the world together, one small act of kindness at a time. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most important lesson of all. Picture yourself sitting across from Walt Whitman in 1869, watching him lean forward with that wild gleam in his eyes as he describes his most ambitious vision yet. We've journeyed through his celebrations of the self and democracy, but now he's about to take us on something far grander, a spiritual expedition that spans continents, centuries, and the very soul of humanity itself. This is Passage to India, and it's unlike anything else in Leaves of Grass. Now you might be thinking, Passage to India, isn't that about colonialism or trade routes? Hold that thought, because Whitman is about to completely reimagine what a passage to India really means. For him, this isn't about British imperialism or economic exploitation. It's about the deepest spiritual journey imaginable, a quest for unity that connects every human soul across every boundary we've ever created. Picture the year 1869 for a moment. The Suez Canal has just opened, dramatically shortening the journey between Europe and Asia. The transcontinental railroad has finally linked America's coasts. The Atlantic cable is transmitting messages across the ocean in minutes rather than weeks. Whitman is witnessing the birth of our modern connected world, and he's absolutely electrified by it. But here's the beautiful thing. He doesn't see these technological marvels as ends in themselves. He sees them as stepping stones toward something infinitely more profound. Listen to how Whitman describes these achievements. He calls them God's purpose from the first, as if every railroad spike driven and every cable laid was part of some cosmic plan to bring humanity together. Think about this for a moment. When was the last time you looked at your smartphone or your internet connection as a tool for spiritual unity? Whitman would have seen our modern technology as the ultimate fulfillment of this vision, these invisible threads connecting every corner of the earth. But here's where Whitman gets really revolutionary. Most of his contemporaries saw progress as a straight line from primitive to civilized, with Western culture as the obvious pinnacle. Whitman flips this completely upside down. His passage to India is actually a journey backward and forward simultaneously, back to the ancient wisdom of the East, forward to a future where that wisdom merges with Western innovation. He's essentially saying, we've conquered distance and time, but now we need to conquer the separation between souls. Imagine Whitman as a spiritual archaeologist, digging through layers of human history. He finds Buddha under the bo tree, Christ on the cross, the ancient Vedic poets composing hymns to creation itself. But he's not content to leave these treasures buried in the past. He wants to bring them into conversation with steamships and telegraphs, with democracy and modern science. It's as if he's saying, what if we took the technological power to connect the world and combined it with the spiritual wisdom to actually understand each other? Now, think about this in our own time. We live in Whitman's dream world, don't we? We can video chat with someone in Mumbai while having coffee in Manhattan. We can read ancient Buddhist texts on the same device we use to order dinner. But have we achieved that deeper unity Whitman envisioned? Or have we just created new ways to stay isolated while appearing connected? Whitman's genius lies in recognizing that true passage, true connection, isn't just about physical or even technological bridges. It's about what he calls the passage to more than India, passage to the soul itself. He's describing a journey where the traveler doesn't just visit foreign lands but becomes foreign to their own limited perspective. The real India he's seeking isn't a place on a map. It's a state of consciousness where East meets West, ancient meets modern, self meets universal soul. Consider how Whitman portrays the soul's journey. He describes it as sailing through seas of God, navigating by stars that are actually the wisdom of ages. The soul becomes both Columbus discovering new worlds and Marco Polo returning with tales of wonder. But unlike those historical explorers who often brought conquest and exploitation, Whitman's spiritual explorer brings only openness and love. What makes this vision so remarkably modern is how Whitman anticipates our current global challenges. He's writing about unity and understanding at a time when the world is becoming interconnected, but not necessarily more harmonious. Sound familiar? Today we face climate change, pandemics, and conflicts that require global cooperation. Yet we struggle with the same tribal thinking that Whitman hoped technology and spiritual growth would help us transcend. As we close this chapter of our journey through Whitman's mind, we're left with his ultimate challenge: to see every technological advance, every moment of global connection as an opportunity for spiritual evolution. The passage to India isn't a destination you reach. It's a way of traveling through life with your heart open to the wisdom of all traditions and your spirit ready to recognize the divine in every human face you encounter along the way. Picture this. You're sitting across from me with your favorite cup of coffee, steam rising between us, and I'm about to tell you something that might just change how you see the relationship between place and poetry, between roots and wings. We're diving into Walt Whitman's profound connection to his birthplace, that sandy stretch of Long Island he called Paumanok, using the old Native American name that rolls off the tongue like waves against the shore. You know how some people seem to carry their hometown in their bones? Whitman was one of those rare souls who didn't just come from a place. He became that place, breathed it into his very being, and then exhaled it as poetry that would transform American literature forever. When he wrote Starting from Paumanok as the opening poem of later editions of Leaves of Grass, he wasn't just giving us his address. He was showing us something revolutionary about how we understand ourselves in relation to the ground beneath our feet. Think about your own childhood neighborhood for a moment. Can you smell it? Can you feel the texture of the sidewalks under your feet? Remember the particular quality of light filtering through the trees? Whitman understood something we often forget in our increasingly mobile world, that the landscapes of our youth don't just shape our memories, they shape our souls. Long Island wasn't merely where young Walter Whitman grew up. It was his first teacher, his first love, his first glimpse of the infinite. The sandy soil of Paumanok, stretching between the Atlantic Ocean and Long Island Sound, gave Whitman his sense of being caught between forces, of existing in that liminal space where opposites meet and dance. Here was a young man literally surrounded by water, watching ships come and go, witnessing the eternal conversation between land and sea. Is it any wonder that his poetry would later flow like water, that his lines would stretch and contract like tides, that he would see himself as containing multitudes the way the ocean contains countless drops? But here's what makes Whitman's relationship with his birthplace so fascinating and so relevant to us today. He didn't let it limit him. Instead, he used it as a launching pad. Starting from Paumanok became his way of saying that every journey toward the universal must begin with the particular, that every great truth must first be grounded in the soil of lived experience. How many of us today feel disconnected from place, floating in a digital world that could be anywhere? Whitman shows us that rootedness isn't about staying put, it's about carrying your essence with you wherever you go. The Native American name Paumanok itself tells us something crucial about Whitman's vision. At a time when most Americans were eager to erase indigenous history, Whitman chose to honor it, to acknowledge that his beloved island had been shaped by other voices, other stories. This wasn't just poetic choice. It was a radical act of inclusion that would define his entire approach to American identity. He understood that to truly know a place, you must know all its stories, not just your own. Consider how this applies to our modern search for authenticity. We live in an age of personal branding, of carefully curated social media profiles, of constant pressure to define ourselves in opposition to others. But Whitman's approach to identity, rooted in his deep connection to Paumanok, suggests something different. He found himself not by rejecting others, but by embracing the multiplicity that his island home had taught him. The fishermen and farmers, the Native Americans and Dutch settlers, the endless variety of birds and plants, all of this became part of who he was. The genius of Starting from Paumanok is that it's both deeply personal and utterly democratic. Whitman is saying that every person's birthplace, no matter how humble or unremarkable it might seem, contains the seeds of poetry, of meaning, of connection to the larger human story. Your suburban street, your apartment building, your rural crossroads, these aren't obstacles to overcome on your way to significance. They're the very foundation of your significance. As we move deeper into Leaves of Grass together, remember this image of the young poet standing on his sandy island, looking out at the endless water, learning to see the infinite in the intimate. Whitman discovered that you don't have to travel to the ends of the earth to find wonder. You just have to learn how to truly see the place where you stand. And perhaps that's the most practical wisdom we can take from his Paumanok roots. That home isn't just where we come from, but how we choose to carry that coming from into everything we become. Picture this. You're sitting at your kitchen table on a Sunday morning scrolling through social media, when suddenly you feel this overwhelming urge to just leave, to pack a bag, walk out your front door, and see where the road takes you. That restless energy, that call to adventure that seems to whisper from somewhere deep inside your chest. Walt Whitman felt it too, and in his Song of the Open Road, he transforms that universal longing into something magnificent. Now think about this for a moment. When was the last time you took a road trip without a GPS? When did you last venture somewhere without checking reviews, reading guides, or planning every detail? Whitman's Song of the Open Road isn't just about physical travel, though it certainly celebrates that. It's about embracing uncertainty as a fundamental part of being alive, about finding freedom not in our destinations but in our willingness to begin the journey itself. Whitman opens with that famous declaration, "Afoot and light-hearted I take to the open road, healthy, free, the world before me." Can you feel the energy in those words? He's not riding in a carriage or even on horseback. He's walking, carrying nothing but his own spirit and curiosity. There's something profoundly democratic about walking, isn't there? Rich or poor, young or old, anyone can put one foot in front of the other and discover what lies beyond the next hill. But here's where Whitman gets really interesting, and where his 19th century wisdom speaks directly to our 21st century souls. He writes about the road as a teacher, as a companion that offers lessons you simply cannot learn in the safety of your familiar surroundings. Think about the last time you faced real uncertainty. Maybe it was starting a new job, moving to a different city, or ending a relationship that had run its course. Remember that mixture of terror and exhilaration. That's exactly what Whitman is celebrating. He understood something that modern psychology now confirms. Growth happens at the edges of our comfort zones. When he writes, "From this hour I ordain myself loosed of limits and imaginary lines," he's talking about more than geographical boundaries. He's talking about the invisible fences we build in our minds, the stories we tell ourselves about what we can and cannot do, about who we are and who we might become. Consider how radical this was for Whitman's time, and how radical it remains today. In the 1850s, most people lived and died within a few miles of where they were born. The idea of wandering freely, of choosing your own path rather than following the one laid out by family tradition or social expectation, was revolutionary. Today, we have more mobility than ever before, yet somehow we often feel more trapped than ever. We have GPS, but we've lost our sense of direction. We have endless options, but we're paralyzed by choice. Whitman offers us a different way of thinking about freedom. He writes, "The earth, that is sufficient. I do not want the constellations any nearer." This isn't about escaping reality or chasing some impossible dream. It's about recognizing that everything we need for a meaningful life is already here, available to us if we're brave enough to step outside our routines and really engage with the world around us. Now here's something beautiful about how Whitman sees the road. It's not lonely. Throughout the poem, he encounters other travelers, and each meeting becomes an opportunity for connection and understanding. He sees the road as fundamentally democratic, a place where artificial barriers between people break down. The wealthy merchant and the struggling farmer, the young adventurer and the wise elder, all become fellow travelers sharing the same path. This vision feels particularly relevant in our age of increasing polarization and digital isolation. Whitman reminds us that when we venture beyond our bubbles, when we actually encounter people different from ourselves, we discover our fundamental humanity. The road strips away pretense and reveals what really matters. But perhaps the most powerful insight in Song of the Open Road is Whitman's understanding that the journey itself is the destination. He writes about the perpetual journey and finds joy not in arriving somewhere but in the act of traveling. This isn't about being restless or unable to settle down. It's about maintaining what Buddhists call beginner's mind, that sense of openness and curiosity that allows us to see familiar things with fresh eyes. As we close this exploration of Whitman's open road, consider this. You don't need to quit your job and hitchhike across the country to embrace his wisdom. The open road exists wherever you choose to approach life with curiosity rather than certainty, with openness rather than judgment. It's there when you take a different route home from work, when you strike up a conversation with a stranger, when you say yes to an opportunity that scares you a little. Whitman's road is always there, waiting for you to take that first step. The question isn't whether you're ready for the journey. The question is whether you're ready to discover who you might become along the way. You know, there are moments in literature that stop you dead in your tracks, moments that feel so raw and immediate you forget you're reading something written over a century ago. We're about to encounter one of those moments in Walt Whitman's Vigil strain, I Kept on the Field One Night. And I want you to imagine settling deeper into that coffee shop chair, because this poem is going to take us somewhere profound. Picture this. It's the middle of the Civil War, and Whitman has just delivered one of the most intimate, heartbreaking tributes to fallen soldiers ever written. But here's what makes this poem extraordinary. It's not about the grand strategy of war or the politics of the battlefield. It's about something much more fundamental. What happens when one human being sits with another in their final moments, and how love transcends even death itself. The poem opens with Whitman describing a vigil he kept beside a young soldier who had been mortally wounded. Now, think about this for a moment. When was the last time you really sat with someone in their pain, not just checking your phone while half listening, but truly being present? Whitman shows us what that looks like in its purest form. He describes how he found this young man, barely more than a boy really, lying on the battlefield under the stars. And instead of moving on, instead of rushing to the next urgent task, he simply stayed. There's something almost sacred about the way Whitman describes this vigil. He talks about how vigil wondrous and vigil sweet he kept, watching over this dying soldier through the night. The repetition of vigil isn't accidental. Whitman is elevating this act of witness, this act of companionship, to something holy. And isn't that what we're all searching for, really? Someone who will stay with us when everything falls apart. What strikes me most powerfully about this poem is how Whitman captures the strange intimacy that can develop between strangers in extreme circumstances. He describes looking into the soldier's face, noting his youth, his beauty, the way the moonlight played across his features. This isn't just observation, it's a form of love. Think about the healthcare workers during the pandemic who held iPads so families could say goodbye to loved ones, or the way strangers helped each other during natural disasters. There's something in the human spirit that compels us to reach across the void of isolation, especially in our darkest hours. Whitman writes about how he faithfully loved this young soldier, even though they were essentially strangers. Now, what does that mean, to faithfully love someone you barely know? I think it means seeing the full humanity in another person, recognizing that their pain is your pain, their loss is a loss for all of us. It's the kind of love that doesn't ask for anything in return, doesn't need a history or a future. It simply exists in the present moment, complete and sufficient. The poem becomes even more poignant when Whitman describes the practical details of his vigil. He talks about covering the soldier's face with a blanket, about the sounds of distant battle, about waiting for dawn. These aren't romanticized details. They're the real, gritty elements of what it means to care for another human being. How many of us have sat in hospital waiting rooms, or beside someone's bed during a difficult night, knowing that our presence might be the only comfort we can offer? But here's where Whitman's genius really shines through. He doesn't try to make sense of the tragedy or offer easy consolation. He simply bears witness. The soldier dies, and Whitman buries him there on the battlefield, marking the spot so he can find it again. There's something so tender about this image, this older man carefully noting the location where a young stranger lies buried, as if to say, Your life mattered. Your death will not be forgotten. When I read this poem today, I can't help but think about all the modern vigils we keep. The parents staying up all night with sick children, the friends who sit with someone going through divorce or job loss, the volunteers at hospices who simply hold hands with people who are dying alone. Whitman understood that these moments of witness, these acts of staying present with suffering, are among the most sacred things we can do for each other. The poem ends with Whitman walking away from the grave at sunrise, but carrying something with him, the memory of that young soldier, the weight of having been trusted with someone's final hours. And isn't that how all meaningful encounters change us? We don't remain the same after we've truly seen another person's vulnerability, after we've chosen to stay when we could have walked away. As we move forward in our exploration of Whitman's work, carry this image with you. The poet sitting under stars beside a dying stranger, offering nothing but presence, but making that presence feel like everything. Because sometimes, that's exactly what love looks like. Picture this. You're browsing through a bookstore or scrolling through your digital library, and suddenly you pick up this collection of poems. But instead of diving straight into flowery verses about nature or love, the poet literally stops you in your tracks and says, "Hey you, yes you, holding this book right now, let me talk to you for a minute." That's exactly what Walt Whitman does in this remarkable poem called "Whoever You Are Holding Me Now in Hand." And it's one of the most audacious and intimate pieces of writing you'll ever encounter. Think about the last time someone looked you directly in the eye and spoke to you with complete honesty, no pretense, no small talk. That raw, unfiltered connection is precisely what Whitman creates here, except he's doing it across time and space through the medium of his book. He's reaching through the pages, through decades or even centuries, to grab you by the shoulders and say, "Listen, before we go any further, there are some things you need to know about me." What makes this poem so revolutionary is how Whitman completely shatters the traditional relationship between poet and reader. Usually, when we read poetry, we're like invisible observers peeking into the poet's world. But here, Whitman flips that dynamic entirely. He makes you, the reader, the active participant in the experience. He's essentially saying, "You think you're just casually reading my work? Think again. By holding this book, you're entering into a relationship with me." Now, think about this for a moment. How many books have you read where the author directly acknowledges your presence as a reader? Most writers maintain this polite fiction that they're just telling their story and you happen to be listening. But Whitman refuses to play that game. He's brutally honest about what this reading experience is going to be like, warning you that his words might shock you, that his ideas might challenge everything you think you know about poetry, about America, about yourself. He tells his reader something fascinating and a bit unsettling, that to truly understand him, you can't just read his words casually while sitting in your comfortable parlor or coffee shop. He suggests that to really get him, you'd need to seek him out in the rough places, among the working people in the wild spaces of America. It's like he's saying, "You want to know who I am? Don't look for me in the sanitized version of my poetry. Find me in the streets, in the factories, with the sailors and the farmers." This connects so powerfully to our modern world, doesn't it? How often do we try to understand people through their curated social media profiles or their polished public personas? Whitman is essentially warning against this superficial understanding. He's saying that if you want to truly know someone, you have to be willing to encounter them in their full complexity, in their messy, unfiltered reality. But here's where Whitman gets really interesting. After warning you about all the ways you might misunderstand him, after telling you that his book might not be what you're expecting, he still invites you to continue the journey. It's like a friend warning you that the movie you're about to watch together is going to be intense and challenging, but then saying, "But if you're up for it, let's do this thing together." The poem becomes this incredible meditation on intimacy and connection. Whitman is essentially asking, what does it mean to truly know another person through their words? When you read someone's deepest thoughts and feelings, what kind of relationship are you entering into? He's making the act of reading feel almost physical, almost romantic. He talks about his words as if they're his actual presence, as if by reading them, you're literally holding him in your hands. This idea feels incredibly relevant in our digital age, where we form deep connections with people we've never met through their writing, their videos, their podcasts. Whitman understood something profound about how words can create genuine intimacy between strangers. He knew that when someone shares their authentic self through language, something real and powerful happens between writer and reader. What Whitman is ultimately offering here is a new kind of honesty in literature. He's refusing to hide behind literary conventions or polite distance. Instead, he's saying, if we're going to do this together, if you're going to read my work and I'm going to share my soul with you, then let's be real about what that means. It's an invitation to a deeper, more authentic kind of reading experience, one where both poet and reader show up fully present and engaged. As we move deeper into Leaves of Grass, remember this moment of direct connection Whitman has established with you, because it sets the tone for everything that follows. Picture yourself settling into your favorite chair with that perfect cup of coffee, steam rising gently as we dive into one of the most emotionally charged poems ever written by an American. Walt Whitman's "O Captain, My Captain" isn't just a poem about a ship returning to harbor. It's a heart-wrenching cry of grief that captures one of the most devastating moments in American history. And here's what makes it so powerful. Whitman transforms the assassination of Abraham Lincoln into something we can all understand, the loss of someone who guided us through our darkest storm. Now think about this for a moment. Have you ever experienced that crushing feeling when someone you deeply admired, someone who felt almost invincible, suddenly wasn't there anymore? Maybe it was a beloved teacher, a family patriarch, or even a public figure who inspired you. That's exactly what Whitman captures here, but he does it through this brilliant metaphor of a ship's captain who has successfully navigated treacherous waters, only to die just as the vessel reaches safe harbor. The poem opens with those unforgettable lines. "O Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done, the ship has weathered every rack, the prize we sought is won." Whitman is painting America as this battered ship that has just survived the Civil War. Imagine a vessel with torn sails, splintered masts, crew members exhausted beyond measure, but somehow, miraculously, still afloat. The fearful trip represents those 4 brutal years of brother fighting brother, families torn apart, a nation literally splitting in two. And the prize we sought, that's the preservation of the Union, the end of slavery, everything Lincoln fought so desperately to achieve. But here's where Whitman's genius really shines through. Just as the crowds are cheering on the shore, just as victory bells are ringing and people are throwing their hats in celebration, the speaker makes this horrifying discovery. The Captain Lincoln lies, fallen cold and dead on the deck. Can you imagine anything more tragic? It's like winning the Super Bowl but losing your star quarterback in the final seconds, or finally reaching the summit of Everest only to have your guide collapse just steps from the peak. What makes this poem so timeless is how it captures that universal human experience of achieving something monumental while simultaneously losing what matters most. Think about modern parallels. How many times have we seen leaders who fought tirelessly for change, only to be struck down just as their vision was coming to fruition? Martin Luther King Jr. comes to mind, assassinated just as the civil rights movement was gaining unstoppable momentum. Or consider how many families have experienced a breadwinner passing away, just as financial security was finally within reach. Whitman structures this poem like an emotional roller coaster, and he does it deliberately. Each stanza begins with celebration, "O Captain, my Captain," but then crashes into the stark reality of death. It's almost like he's in denial, repeatedly trying to wake Lincoln up, begging him to rise up and hear the bells, and see the swaying mass of people celebrating. This isn't just poetic device. This is genuine psychological trauma playing out on the page. How many of us have experienced that moment when our brain simply refuses to accept devastating news? The beauty of using a ship metaphor is that everyone understands the relationship between captain and crew. A good captain doesn't just give orders, they shoulder the responsibility for every soul on board. They make the hard decisions when storms hit. They stay awake when others sleep. They go down with the ship if necessary. Lincoln embodied exactly this kind of leadership during America's greatest crisis. He carried the weight of a fractured nation on his shoulders, made impossible decisions about war and peace, and ultimately gave his life for the cause he believed in. But here's what's really striking about this poem. Whitman doesn't focus on politics or policy. He focuses on love. This isn't a political eulogy, it's a love letter. The speaker calls Lincoln "my father," showing how the president had become not just a leader but a paternal figure for the entire nation. In times of crisis, don't we all long for that kind of steady, protective presence? The poem's final image is haunting, the speaker walking the deck with mournful tread, while the captain lies fallen cold and dead. It's a perfect metaphor for how a nation moves forward after losing its guiding light. We continue the journey, but we're forever changed by the absence of the one who brought us safely through the storm. As we close this exploration of Whitman's masterpiece, remember that great art doesn't just capture historical moments. It reveals eternal truths about human experience, loss, and the price of leadership that resonate just as powerfully today as they did over 150 years ago. Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass is a monumental exploration of the self, nature, and the interconnectedness of all existence. Whitman presents a universe where the individual is both a singular entity and an integral part of a larger whole. With his free verse and expansive vision, he encourages the reader to embrace the vastness of life and the depth of the human spirit. Here are some key takeaways from this timeless work. 1. Embrace your individuality asterisk. Whitman celebrates the unique essence of every person. To apply this, start by acknowledging your own strengths and quirks. Celebrate them rather than conform to societal norms. Start incredibly small by choosing one thing each day that showcases your true self, whether it's wearing that bold outfit or speaking up in a meeting. 2. Find the divine in the everyday. He shows that divinity is present in all things, from the mundane to the extraordinary. Practically, this can be done by practicing mindfulness. Take a moment each day to appreciate something ordinary around you, such as the sunrise, a leaf, or even the hum of city life. Be patient with yourself as you cultivate this habit. 3. Connect with nature. Whitman's work is a testament to the healing and unifying power of nature. To integrate this into your life, make it a priority to spend time outdoors. Whether it's a walk in the park or a weekend hike, start small and increase your outdoor time gradually as you find peace and inspiration in the natural world. 4. Celebrate the journey of life. Whitman encourages us to live life fully and embrace its ebbs and flows. You can apply this by reflecting on your life's journey, acknowledging both achievements and setbacks. Begin by journaling once a week about your experiences and what you've learned. Be gentle with yourself, recognizing that each step is part of your unique path. 5. Practice radical acceptance asterisk. Whitman's poetry often reflects an acceptance of all human experiences. To practice this, next time you face a challenge, acknowledge your feelings without judgment. Start with small, manageable situations and gradually apply this mindset to larger challenges in your life. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below with at least one idea from this book that stuck with you, one concept you're going to carry forward. It could be something that challenged your thinking, something you want to try, or even something you disagreed with. Your insight might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today. And if this summary gave you something valuable, a new perspective, a spark of motivation, or even just a peaceful hour with your coffee, share it with someone who might need it too. Subscribe to One Book, One Coffee, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a new summary. Every week, we sit down together with one great book, one warm cup of coffee, and the simple belief that wisdom, shared well, can change lives. Until next time, keep reading, keep growing, and remember, every small step counts. See you at the next book.